onto this. Okay, so now that's going, and I'm still spotlighted, I believe. Yeah. And so for my sake, I just need to put speaker view on so the recording is getting me. So welcome to our 7th meeting of Exploring the Situationists. And this meeting, as you know, was for issue number 11, which had some of the following: the explosion point of ideology in China, an article by Kayati on third world movements, the minimum definition of revolutionary organizations, a short piece by Vanagem on organization, a short piece by V&A on new forms of action against ardent politics, and Two Local Wars, which is about the Vietnam War and the Arab-Israel War of 1967, so-called the Six-Day War. So I'm going to leave that latter article to the end and leave a little more time because of its obvious relevance to current affairs, and just go through these others relatively quickly. And so we'll have it in 2 parts. We'll do the China and the third world thing in one lump, and then the 3 short articles that are kind of about organizational things and tactics and so on, and then the final thing on the 2 local wars. So the explosion point of ideology in China starts out by sort of resuming a little thing near the beginning of the address to revolutionaries in Algeria that we read about a month ago. And I'll read the first paragraph. The International Association of Totalitarian Bureaucracies has completely fallen apart. This is in 1967. In the words of the address published by the Situationists in Algiers in July 1965, the irreversible, quote, collapse of the revolutionary image, unquote, that the, quote, bureaucratic lie, unquote, counterposed to the whole of capitalist society as its pseudo-negation and actual support, has become obvious. In other words, the collapse has become obvious. And first of all, on the train where official capitalism has had the greatest interest in upholding the pretense of its adversary, namely the global competition between the bourgeoisie and the so-called socialist camp. That camp had in any case never been socialist. Now, in spite of all the attempts to patch it up, it has ceased even to be a camp. So I'm not going to quote anything from that article. I'm just going to mention a few things. This was right in the early parts of the so-called Cultural Revolution, which supposedly was something that Mao had triggered in order to get rid of, capitalist roaders or revisionists or whatever the enemy was called or something. In reality, as the Situationists note, it had absolutely zero to do with culture. That was just a complete hogwash. Basically, it was just the maneuver of Mao and his clique to get the youth all revved up so that they would attack Mao's rivals. And a lot of them did that, and a lot of Mao's rivals and their supporters ended up being killed or arrested or something like this. But it was a very chaotic situation because the rivals were also pretty powerful. And in fact, they had demoted Mao a few years earlier. when Mao's brain project, The Great Leap Forward, had been an utter total flop and caused tens of millions of people to die of starvation. And when that happened, it was such a mess that Liu Shaoqi and his camp, the sort of more moderate ones, removed Mao from the presidency of China. This was like around 1960 or so. But Mao was still the chairman of the Communist Party of China. And so he was actually still in a potentially more powerful position than the rivals were. And Mao had more prestige than these other people because he had been the leader during all the time since around 1930 or so.
Ken, you've frozen up.
Oh, okay.
Not from me. It's all good here.
You guys hear it? Okay, good.
It's all good here.
Okay, it might be on my end. Never mind. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
So anyway, so when Mao triggered this sort of teleguided revolt, the analogy would be like if some person in the United States got all the Boy Scouts together and said, attack my rival, he's not patriotic or something, and if it was such a situation that they would actually do that. Because these people, these kids have grown up, with pictures of Mao, and say this guy is the god or something. And so if these rivals were saying, no, he's not quite God or something, yes, he's a great man, but we need to moderate this or something, they were in an awkward situation because they had to be officially Maoist too. I mean, they had been officially Maoist all their lives. So it was kind of a complicated thing, but nevertheless, they were fighting for their lives also. So there were rival groups of Red Guards, who were fighting against the Mao Red Guards. And some of the Red Guards, as sometimes happens in these situations, kind of they're taking the Maoist rhetoric seriously. And if you took the Maoist rhetoric seriously, you would be treating these opponents as if, and remember, the opponents are in charge of most of the state networks and all that kind of thing, all the officials. So they're treating them as enemies and saying, we've got to destroy these things. And then part of those people are part of the Mao faction. And the Mao says, no, we don't want to overthrow these bureaucrats, go overthrow those bureaucrats. So each of the sides has to deny that they are bureaucrats while accusing the other of being bureaucrats or of being traitors or something. So you can imagine all the ridiculous stuff that is going on. And most of this article is pointing out that, that this is not just chaotic, but it's kind of chaotic with a reason. It's a power civil war between rival bureaucracies, which has not happened before. And then they go into that, like under Stalin, that didn't happen. There was a period like right after Lenin where you could say Stalin and Trotsky were sort of debating it, and Trotsky lost. But most of the time, everything was from the total top down. And if there was any rivalry, nobody else knew about it. You just killed your opponent. And then after he was safely dead, you said, oh, he turned out to be a traitor and good thing we got him. So they're saying that in Society of the Spectacle, which we will be reading next year, there's some theses that examine the contradictions of Stalinism, and where it sort of purports to be the absolute truth of something, And then if somebody suddenly is on the out, that person has disappeared. You just pretend he never existed. Because if he existed, how could Stalin have, in his omniscience, have allowed this person to happen? How could Mao have been buddies with Liu Shaoqi for 30 years and suddenly find that he's a traitor? It's just idiotic. And but it's kind of inevitable because they have these contradictions in their society, just like the Western society does, except they're more extreme. So I'm not going to go into that too much further. There's a really good book for those of you who want to read in more depth by Simone Leys, Leys, called The Chairman's New Clothes. It's like Chairman Mao's new clothes. And it's a detailed examination of all this stuff that is just being treated in this article very briefly. It's a whole book. Fascinating and absolutely on target. So I'll try to mention that in what I send out tomorrow. So then in the third world thing by Coyote called Setting Straight Some Popular Misconceptions About Revolutions in the Underdeveloped Countries. He goes through, he summarizes, first of all, where did these things come in? Like that when these third world countries, many of them who had been colonized, most of them actually, start to revolt, they've been, because of their, in most cases, underdeveloped economy or technology, they've been trained to be dependent on France or England or Germany or whoever was the colonizer. And when the colonizers are finally driven out by some native grouping, that native grouping tends to be a bureaucracy, a kind of military bureaucracy, with the peasants being the sort of bodies. Because there, in most cases, was not very much of a working class to, where you could have strikes and, the more modern forms of revolution. So he's pointing that out. This is something you can't just dismiss. It means if you're in some place like the Congo or Vietnam or whatever these various countries might be, most of the population is peasants. Most of them are illiterate, etc. So you almost inevitably end up with these leaders who end up almost inevitably following the Stalinist pattern paradigm. So and China is a case, a classic case where you get, instead of Stalin, you have Mao. In Vietnam, instead of Stalin, you have Ho Chi Minh, et cetera, et cetera. So then Coyote ends his thing with the only people who are really underdeveloped are those who see a positive value in the power of their masters. So he's doing a neat little thing here about, well, what does underdevelopment mean? Well, you're mentally underdeveloped if you think it's great that your tyrannical leader is, a god or something like that, and you're so pleased to be serving him. That's underdevelopment. That's more important underdevelopment than economic underdevelopment. And he goes on to rush to catch up with capitalist reification remains the best road to reinforced underdevelopment. The question of economic development is inseparable from the question of who is the real owner of the economy, the real master of wealth. Everything else is nothing but the babble of specialists. I'm going to mute everybody, and Peter, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just did that actually.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I'm ahead of you. Good. We're
Okay,
good.
okay. I was hearing some background noise there. So far, the revolutions in the underdeveloped countries have only tried to imitate Bolshevism in various ways. From now on, the point is to go beyond it through the power of the Soviets. So I think we can stop there and have any questions or comments that you have about these two articles. Bruce, just a minute here. Let's see. Peter?
Yeah, I'm asking Bruce to unmute. Bruce, if you would click on, there you go. Thank you.
Hey,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yeah, but
We can hear you.
Peter,
We can hear you.
I think it's simpler if you let me handle it, because
Sure.
otherwise we end up doing two things at once. Now I can't see where Bruce is. Okay, Bruce, go for it.
Just a comment about the Cultural Revolution. Do you realize there was a Cultural Revolution in Russia in the early 1930s, and that could not be explained by a factional dispute?
What was it?
It was it took place like as a way of setting the stage for the mass collectivization and the rapid industrialization of the Soviet Union and the implementation of Stalin's foreign policies.
Okay, what it may have been called a culture. You know, the fact that these two things were called cultural revolutions, neither of them had anything to do with, you know, I think that's just a coincidence. I mean, Mao may have got the idea, like, oh, Stalin had this, so we'll call it that. But
Perhaps.
yeah, you know, and then they throw a label like that out there, and people think it has something to do with archaeology of ancient art or something. You know, this is just, you might as well call it, you know, the ABC revolution or something like that.
It did have one similarity in the sense that what Stalin was trying to do was mold society in the image that he wanted it to be molded in, which is true, was also true of Mao with his Cultural Revolution.
Right. Okay, I believe Ed.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you were talking about this about the usual development along the Soviet lines, and I was wondering if you had a counter example to that, like you said, most of the time it does develop along the Soviet lines, but is there another place where it didn't develop in that way? And
not that I am aware of. Okay. All you can say is that in some places it was maybe a little more nuanced. Like Cuba, for example, was definitely Stalinist. I mean, it wasn't Stalinist at the very beginning, but very soon Castro decided, okay, we're going to go this way because they'll blah, blah, blah. But obviously, you know, it was not as Stalinist as Stalin or Mao, you know, partly because cultural reasons, partly, you know, for various things. But you can still call it Stalinist for sure. Yeah. I mean, and Castro would have said, yeah, of course. You know, it's the sort of thing. Whereas some of these things like Kim Il-sung or the Albanian Communist Party or something were vehemently trying to imitate Stalin. Some of the others, like in Poland or Czechoslovakia, you might have had ones where, again, for different reasons, like Czechoslovakia, for example, was more industrialized. So it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to have a thing like Ho Chi Minh or Mao, because there weren't any peasants in Czechoslovakia. You know, it was like factories and stuff like that. So they had different, you know, they had factions of the Communist Party that would be sort of more technocratic in that.
So Stalinists would be deploying the proletariat as the main changing factor, whereas in Czechoslovakia that didn't happen so much. Is that do I understand you correctly?
I'm not sure I understood. I'm just saying, okay, like say Czechoslovakia, where we had a thing in 1968, which we're going to be reading in about in January. Also an article by Kayati, by the way, where you had a Stalinist society there because it had been taken over by Stalin after World War II. But then you had a sort of liberal Stalinist bureaucracy that was supported by the general population. And then you had the Russians come in and mix that and put the hardline Stalinists back in power. So it was Stalinist in either case, but you can look at it and want, you know, that because it was this more advanced, industrial advanced country, this kind of peasant stuff didn't wash, you know, so you had a little different thing there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get definitive about what you mean by Stalinist. It sounds like that's intimately connected with the role of the peasants, but if you could say more, I appreciate it.
Well, because the peasantry doesn't necessarily lead to Stalinism, but if you have a revolution or an anti-colonial war, it will tend to be the peasants who are doing most of the fighting, and the peasants will be led by, well, whoever they're led by will tend to be like a guerrilla leader. And those kind of things will tend to form a party that was like the Bolsheviks. You know, in other words, it's like a military thing. You know, when they win, it's like a military dictatorship, but they're spouting Marxist slogans.
Gotcha.
Oh, the people, the workers are doing, you know, yay, we won, with this kind of thing.
Our armies are.
I mean, there could be peasant revolutions without that, but it's just more difficult because a modern revolution, which is what the Situationists are talking about, you really need it to be relatively industrialized, you know, and urban and that kind of thing. Bruce, again?
So you wouldn't have a military leader? I don't understand. Well,
Yeah, an interesting side note with respect to Cuba is that in 1965, Che Guevara went to North Korea, and he came back full of praise for it, and he was proclaiming that he wanted Cuba to be remodeled along the model of North Korea. So he wanted Cuba to be even more Stalinist than it was under Castro. And I really believe, in all my studies of that period, that quietly, without saying it out loud, that Che Guevara was actually siding with the Chinese in the Chinese-Soviet dispute, that he wanted a more orthodox Stalinism than Castro did.
Very possibly. Mike Ballard.
Hi.
Hi.
I guess I'm on.
Yes.
It's my been my observation that the whole shebang there started with Lenin, and the idea of the faction of the RSDLP, the Bolsheviks, that if they took state power in Russia, that would set a spark that would start a prairie fire. And the prairie fire of revolution in Europe did indeed start, but it was doused in the blood of the proletariat. And after that, it was a question of, do we allow ourselves to be doused in our blood, or do we try to create a proletariat in a country that's like 90% peasants? And so that's basically how it plays out. Now, who is going to be the factional leader of that? The demigod was fought out in the 20s, and I think it even went on in the 30s. But it happened to be Stalin. So
Yeah.
I think most of the Bolsheviks basically agreed that with Stalin over Trotsky. But the idea was that they had to create a really strong state to protect themselves. And the only way they could do that was through industrialization. So all these other peasant countries did, they sort of followed along. But what was totally forgotten was the whole thing that Marx was bringing up, and that was the social relation of capital. That it's based on wage labor, and that does a mind fuck on the proletariat, even if you're industrializing in the name of communism. And so they basically just transitioned from a czarist feudalist kind of peasant state to a capitalist operation, and then it all fell apart in '89 and became a full blown capitalist operation.
Yeah, you're right, and again, as Coyote very briefly outlines, when the bureaucracy has come to power, which has been in all these various countries, either Stalinist or sort of like third world military regimes that aren't even Stalinist, but are kind of similar. What that class does is it does the same thing that the bourgeoisie did, except the bourgeoisie did that over a long period of time, like for over a period of centuries. The bourgeoisie was kind of growing, and then when it got powerful enough, like in the French Revolution, it could overthrow the feudal regime, and then the bourgeoisie, the rich people, the lawyers, all this are there to take over because they've already de facto been running things. Even if there was a nominal king or one thing or another, they were the ones that were, the politicians were in their pockets, and all this kind of thing. The king owed them money, and was at their depended on them, and so on. So they did that over a period of centuries where they had built up, and there were more and more of this. So then in the 20th century, where you get the Russian Revolution, Russia was not at that point. Russia had a bourgeoisie, but it didn't amount to much. Just in a couple, in St. Petersburg, which later became Leningrad, and maybe a little bit in Moscow, but hardly anywhere else was there a bourgeoisie. And therefore, there also wasn't a proletariat to speak of, except in a few factories in St. Petersburg, or, on a few ships or stuff like this. So even so, Russia was much more advanced than China or Vietnam or the Congo or these various other places. And the SI points that out, like this was already difficult, if not impossible, in Russia. And if it was difficult there, forget it, when you're in a thing that's like 99% peasants instead of only 90% peasants or something. So basically, what these third world regimes have to do is, or what they strive to do, is to do what the bourgeoisie did, but much faster. And if you do it much faster, it's got to be much more bloody. Like if you read about in Capital about so-called primitive accumulation that happened in England, it happened over a period of centuries. And what that meant was that there had to be a certain accumulation of wealth, of capital or something, that you couldn't just do all. If you were in the Middle Ages, you couldn't just proclaim there will be blah, blah, blah. It took a while before society evolved in such a way that you could have such a thing as a factory even. I mean, in the Middle Ages, they wouldn't even know what that was, just and so on. Or so that you have enough accumulation that you could have a leisure class of lawyers, scientists, philosophers, teachers, whatever, who can kind of then, snowball into creating more and more of those people who know how to organize a factory or something, who know how to organize sales and trade and all this stuff. And then, so it took, to do that, you had to drive people from the land so that certain people owned most of the land. And then those people end up also owning most of the factories later on. Until that happened, like when you had things like the commons, which you had in the Middle Ages, it was hard to get anybody to go to a factory because, they're peasants and, why would they want to move? Well, if you force them to move, then they have nothing else they can do except be a factory worker. And so that's what's called the proletarian, somebody that can't grow their own food or do these other things. So if you're in this third world country, to do that, you have to, the only way you can do it is virtually enslave most of the population, which is what Stalin and Mao did. It's like you're putting millions of people in concentration camps, which is total slavery, and and remember, they're doing work. They're not just sitting in jail. They're building the factories, or they're growing food or whatever they're forced to do, but they're not getting any pay, and they're just dying like slaves used to. And then you can have other people who aren't quite in concentration camps, but they're in a very police state-ish kind of control, where they go to the factories and you better not complain, and striking is illegal and all that, and you're going to have to work a 12-hour day, and fuck you if you don't like it, you're going to go to the Siberia, all this kind of stuff. So that's where you get this brutality that is associated with Stalinism, because those societies desperately need, or the bureaucracies do anyway, to create this, this new economy. But the economy they're creating is just like a backward version of the capitalist economy. It's also a capitalist economy, but it's just cruder. Whereas in the United States, for a long time, we've had a relatively rich capitalist economy where there's all kinds of choices, very little of the slavery kind of thing, except maybe to an extent with Black people in prisons or something. But by and large, there's all these visible options. And this is what Debord calls the diffuse spectacle. It's where you've got a million choices. So you feel like you're totally free. You can choose your job. You can do this, all that. Whereas Stalinism and fascism are both what Debord calls concentrated spectacle, where everything is focused on the leader or on the vanguard party or whatever. And everything else, whether it calls itself socialism or communism or fascism, everything is focused there because it's less rich in possibilities. If you're in China, you can't afford to say, oh, you can buy this choice of cars because only one person in a 10,000 would be able to afford a car. So you don't have that illusion that there's all this abundance that you can just pick and choose from. In the United States, we've got that illusion. Even people who are homeless have the illusion that they're in a world where there's all these potentials, and theoretically they could discover a treasure or win the lottery or something, and they too could suddenly have a choice of all these different things. Nobody in Stalin's Russia believed that, because it simply wasn't possible, and there wasn't even a spectacle that presented it as if it was possible. So I think we better move on to the next section here. Actually, we're doing quite well, so we may have room at the end. I want, Sid, you got one?
Yeah, so is just a question about the definition of proletarian versus peasant. Because you just said, or previously or recently you said that defined proletarian as someone, or maybe it was off the cuff or something, but it was defined as someone who can't grow their own food. So what do we mean when we say proletarian, like, versus peasantry, I guess?
Okay. In that sense, the original sense of the word was from Roman Empire or something, and it just meant the sort of low person who was didn't have any other particular position. But in Marx's era, it had come to mean the people who pretty much had their possessions were very minimal, if any. Like a peasant could have minimal possessions, but maybe they had some land. I mean, even if just a little garden or something like that. They were based on in a region of society where money had less significance. You would grow and barter things and so on like that. And like I say, if you've got land, in a pinch, you can just live on the land, and say, here's our vegetables, and we've got one cow and we've got getting milk from it or something. Like a proletarian doesn't have stuff like that. And normally the proletarian is living in a city where stuff like that isn't even conceivable. You can't have a cow in the city. Even if you had a cow, there's no place for it. And plus you have nothing. Your family probably had nothing. It was a miracle that they managed to pay their rent, at $5 a month or something, because nothing's coming in. So the only thing they can do, another thing would be, like in the Middle Ages, you had workers who owned their tools, the tools of their trade. So you might have a shoemaker or some guy that shoes horses or various things like that. They may have been poor, but they probably inherited from their father, I'm a master shoemaker and I can do this. So they could just set up somewhere on the street and say, hey, I'll make shoes for $1 each, come and get them. A proletarian doesn't have the tools of his trade either, because his trade ends up being something like making a machine or something. There's no, so he has to go hire himself out to a factory or something analogous. I mean, it may be, if it's a train, he's hired to run the train or something like this. But there's no way a proletarian just decides, I'll set up my own train and make it on my own.
So a proletarian basically is someone who has to sell their labor.
Exactly. And so then later, in the Situationist era, they're looking back, but we'll get to this a little bit later, but they expand that to say it's anyone who has no power over their lives and knows it. So that's a little different thing. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about like factory workers, etc. But at a later point, the SI points out that practically everybody is proletarianized, even if they own some stuff or all that. But that we'll get to that later. So let's move on here, and then we can come back to always feel free to jot down and we may have time at the end. You can come back to something you want to talk to more. So I want to start out with the minimum definition of revolutionary organizations and read the whole thing because it's less than a page long. And this is the SI's, you know, when the SI sometimes talks about revolutionary organizations, and of course, one example would be the SI, but they wanted to come up with, or Debord wanted to come up with a thing that wouldn't say just that you have to be situationist or something, which would be a pointless limitation. So they wanted to just get in general where they would draw the line, or as a sort of model. Since the only purpose of a revolutionary organization is the abolition of all existing classes in a way that does not bring about a new division of society, we consider an organization to be revolutionary if it consistently and effectively works towards the international realization of the absolute power of the workers' councils, as prefigured in the experience of the proletarian revolutions of this century. So that's a big sentence. We can come back there in a minute. Such an organization makes an integral critique of the world, or is nothing. By integral critique, we mean a comprehensive critique of all geographical areas where various forms of separate socioeconomic powers exist, as well as a comprehensive critique of all aspects of life. Actually, I am going to stop and make some comments here, because so that first paragraph, well, let's go the second one I just read. The second one, it's like they don't want this to be a partial thing. So they say it has to critique all geographical areas where various forms of separate socioeconomic powers exist. So this means that you can't have an organization that, say, critiques American capitalism and then refuses to critique Cuban Stalinism for whatever reason, and say, well, we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to say, oh, the capitalists in the US are doing these bad things and all this. So obviously, you might vary the critique depending on the differences there are, but it's going to say you can't just say we're just doing this and we're not talking about North Korea, or we're not this. And you have to be talking about all aspects of life. You can't just say we're talking about a cultural revolution here, politics we're leaving aside. Or you can't say we're talking about a political thing where we put a new guy in as president or elect some new Congress people or something, but we're not talking about cultural things. We're not talking about economic things. We're not talking about everyday life. And so on. The Situationists are saying you got to address the whole thing about what our lives are, and so on. To go back to the first paragraph, that first sentence, it's saying if you aren't for abolishing all class societies, then you aren't revolutionary, period. The whole point is to abolish class society, to abolish these kinds of maybe not all hierarchies, because a hierarchy can mean different things, but you don't want a class of people that, because they belong in that class, have a power over another class of people. That's the first thing, basic thing you want to get rid of. And so if you want to do that, they're kind of jumping, they don't go into a description of why this is the case, but they say, if you want to do that, you have to be for, and not just for, but you have to be consistently and effectively for, not just spouting rhetoric, but you have to be working towards the power of workers' councils, because that's the only kind of power that is going to lead to that thing. If you don't have workers' councils and you have some other kind of thing, it means that for some strange reason, the workers still have no power or limited power over their lives. And that's the whole core problem of everything else. Because if they do get power over their own lives, not just the power to run their own factory or something, but to run everything, then the whole class thing just collapses. There's nothing there anymore. So they're saying this is the basic thing. So we will get to that in January. We'll have articles about workers' councils and workers' self-management and stuff like that. But that's they're saying that's the key thing. If you're not for that, you're not even in the ballpark. So the third paragraph here, such an organization sees the beginning and end of its program in the complete decolonization of everyday life. Remember that Debord thing where he talks about everyday life being colonized. It thus aims not at the masses' self-management of the existing world, which you might have thought from that first part, but at its uninterrupted transformation. It embodies the radical critique of political economy, the supersession of the commodity system, and of wage labor. Such an organization refuses to reproduce within itself any of the hierarchical conditions of the dominant world. So this will come up a little bit later but we've already had some of this idea that Debord and some of the other situationists have constantly stressed that if you have a so-called radical organization that is hierarchical, like that has bosses and the other people just do what they're told or something, even if it has radical goals, there's something sick about that. It's going to end up either flopping, or if it succeeds, it's going to just install a new kind of hierarchy. You're going to get Bolsheviks on top instead of congressmen or something. It's partly a matter of habit, and it's partly a matter of interests. As long as you have a hierarchical organization, those hierarchies tend to perpetuate themselves. And you have this kind of separation. One person is powerless, other person has power. Usually it's a whole lot of people are powerless and one leader or something has power. So it's saying, so you have this group and it's saying you don't want any hierarchical kind of conditions in this group. The only limit to participating in its total democracy of this group is that each member must have recognized and appropriated the coherence of its critique. In other words, of its critique. What kind of critique does it have of the society? What kind of program, whatever. They have to have grasped the whole bit there. This coherence must be in both in the critical theory as such and in the relation between this theory and practical activity. The organization radically criticizes every ideology as, and this is kind of a neat little way, like short definition of ideology. It can be either separate power of ideas, like ideas dominate something else, or as ideas of separate power, i.e., you can have a separate power like a bureaucracy and its ideas, just like you can have the bourgeoisie and its ideas. That's what Marx talked about. So one way or the other, an ideology is going to have that kind of separation. And the situationists, like Marx, incidentally, have always stressed that any ideology, by its very nature, is counter-revolutionary. As distinct from a theory, and we'll get to that distinction at some later point, namely the organization, is thus at the same time the negation of any remnants of religion and of the prevailing social spectacle, which from news media to mass culture monopolizes communication between people around their unilateral reception of images of their alienated activity. Huge amount is packed in these things. I can't, I think this is something that you need to mull over, because when Debord was writing it, he was the author of it. He was trying to figure out, how can I get the absolute essentials here in less than a page? And so you have a sentence that somebody else might have written several pages to explain what it meant. But if you read it carefully, you can say there's these two things that it's negation of: remnants of religion, because religion is by definition, according to Situationists, this separation hierarchical thing, and of the social spectacle. The spectacle is like the modern version of religion. So in which, again, we're looking at this kind of ethereal thing like news media, mass culture, which monopolizes communication between people around their unilateral reception of images of their alienated activity. It's like obvious examples of this is that you would watch something on TV where everybody's watching the same thing, or many people are watching the same thing. And then when you turn the TV off and you're somewhere else, you then discuss what the TV broadcasts to you. And who controls the TV? You're getting advertisements, you're getting propaganda, you're getting these different things, or just trivialities. Is this sports team better than that sports team? Is that rock star cuter than that rock star? Just a jillion things like this. And this becomes a dominant, maybe not totally dominant, but a large part of what people actually relate to each other. They meet somebody. Oh, do you like that song? Oh yeah, I like. Oh, I think I like it. That's the trivial example, but by the same token, they'll do the same thing about politicians. And then that starts to get a little bit serious, even though in most cases it's just as silly. But that spectacle, what is this monopolization of that kind of thing? We may have other things going on that counters it. I think like in the internet, we have some of that, but we also have some things where people are doing their own thing and communicating like we're doing right now. So, that's a short definition of the spectacle. The organization dissolves any revolutionary ideology, so-called, unmasking it as the sign of the failure of the revolutionary project, as the private property of new specialists of power, as one more fraudulent representation setting itself above real proletarianized life. So it's just something like whether it's an image of Stalin or Hitler, or whether it's a picture of some great new product that we all must buy, or whatever. Same idea. Last paragraph. Since the ultimate criterion of a modern revolutionary organization is its comprehensiveness, such an organization is ultimately a critique of politics, because that isn't comprehensive. It must explicitly, organization must explicitly aim to dissolve itself as a separate organization at its moment of victory. And again, this is an obvious counterpart to the Bolsheviks or various other things, where they're victorious, and the last thing they're going to do is dissolve themselves. They say, okay, now we got it. Hold on to it. We've got the state. Now we'll get the propaganda in here and get the police, and pretty soon we'll be in good shape. Whereas the kind of revolution the Situationists are talking about is a revolution which would certainly not have the Situationist International as the new leader of the society. At most, it would have, you might have some people like Debord or somebody who people might listen to if he had a suggestion, like they did in May 68. But that's it. No power whatsoever. No machinery to enforce, that you must obey me or something like this. So the next two things I want to go into, I'm going to say almost zero about, because I don't think it's necessary. The Vanagem piece called to aiming for practical truth. Sometimes people criticize the Situationists and they say, oh, this is a lot of jargon and, I can't understand it. In this case, I think some of this article is jargon. I think most of what Vanagem is talking about is real. He's talking about the thing we've gone through before about breaks and exclusions, and that we want our organization to not just be an eclectic bunch of people who disagree with each other and all that, but focus on what we're doing. But I think that a lot of the rhetoric here is just hyperbolic. When I was first starting out to get interested in the Situationists, I would read something like that, and it seemed, wow, boy, he's really hitting it there. But as I sort of dwelled with it, over the years, a lot of it did just seem rhetorical and not so truly incisive as Vanagem at his best, like in the Revolution of Everyday Life or in Basic Banalities. There's very little fluff in those things, in my opinion. Like they may be hard to understand, but or a little bit hyperbolic. But in this case, I'm just going to say that I wouldn't want to defend every sentence that he writes in there, because I think some of it is just overdoing it. On the other hand, the V&A article I think is fine, but it's fairly obvious. Basically, he's saying that at this point, and we're already in 1967 here, he's proposing that the SI do even more of what it's already started to do, namely use more popular means of, if you want to call it propaganda, means of communication. They've already been using comics and film in Debord's films, and various kinds of détournement of this or that. He's just saying, let's go through this more consistently. Comics that's what people read these days, or a film is this magical medium, and so, and then he talks about which rare films are worth, are of some interest. And indeed, the Situationists, particularly in May 68, and to some extent later, did use all these. So there's not very much to say about that. Like they did, if you see this book, oh, I don't have it handy now, but there's a book by V&A that was written after May 68, about May 68. And when you look in that book, it's got dozens of comics in it, mostly things that either the SI did or some other people did, kind of imitating the SI. And it's also got lyrics to a few songs that some of them, like there's a song that Vanagem wrote the lyrics to, and there's another one that Debord's wife at the time, Alice Debord, wrote. A real radical, kind of rousing song. So anyway, basically the SI and anyone who was reading it took up V&A on that and said, yeah, of course, let's do some more of that. So I think I'll stop there. And if any of you have questions or comments about any of those three articles. And we will add you to the spotlight. And Unmute yourself. Oh, I think you just muted yourself again. There you go.
Okay. I'm just going to say, I think the book you may have been looking for is this
Oh,
one
that,
here.
that is it. Yeah. And you see a comic
Roger?
on the very cover.
Yeah. Wonderful read and full of these little cartoons that you're talking about. So that was the one thing. The other was, as I'm reading or rereading this material for this week, I've also started reading this book. And of course, right inside of it, which is the preface, which is kind of an overview of the entire book. I think it was Bruce that mentioned this book. Thank you,
Yes.
Bruce.
Okay.
Excellent one.
Yeah.
And the comment here is a very clear distinction between to control and to manage. To manage is to initiate the decisions oneself as a sovereign person or collectivity in full knowledge of all the relevant facts. To control is to supervise, inspect, or check decisions initiated by others. And there's a breakdown of exactly what those two terms mean and how they are literally collapsed. And the least that the workers can have is maybe some some management, but even that little bit that they have is just, little by little, every day, whittled away. So finally, they have zero control.
Yeah.
But what I love about the book is how they clearly state, here are these two absolutely crucial terms,
Yeah.
and how they literally evaporate. It's a very densely argued book. As you can see, lots of notes all the way through here.
Yeah.
Highly recommended. Thank you, Bruce, for this book.
I agree with that recommendation. Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that because I think we said this even the last time we met, rereading old material or revisiting Marx, Hegel, someone else after encountering the SI makes for a really different read. It makes for me a richer read. I start seeing things more carefully, more nuanced. So to filter your ideas through the SI back and forth in this kind of dialectic is probably one of the best ways to revisit a lot of the text that they themselves were influenced by.
Yeah.
Just to hold up the book again, Enragé, someone was asking about it.
Enragés et Situationnistes dans le mouvement des occupations. Enragés and Situationists in the occupations movement.
Could you put it in the chat?
Sure, yeah.
Thanks.
And it came
Okay,
out
Judy.
it was published right in 1968. So right at the height of all the turmoil, we'll say.
Yeah. Okay, Judy, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, on this aiming for the practical truth, I had a lot of trouble with this. I don't understand his concept of retardation. What is he talking about?
Well, he's talking about, like, if somebody is either in a group or a potential member or something like that, and he or she seems to have, some good qualities, he's articulate or, whatever they may be looking for, but doesn't seem to get some aspect, that's a retardation. It's like either he or she used to know it, but for some mysterious reason no longer gets it.
Well, like what aspects? Because they're, it's not that easy to get this stuff. So
yeah. No, bear in mind that when they're talking, there's sort of two organizations they're talking about. One, and he's usually talking about, it's the SI itself. But bear in mind there, the SI is a unique and particular organization at a certain time and place. It's not like everybody has to be like that. And for that purpose, maybe 5 or 10 people is fine. They just, they're trying to get a very focused definition, like this definition of revolutionary organizations, or like the thing about China, of like, what's going on here? What's the essential points? We're not, somebody else can write volumes about it, and what are the key things? And to do that, that's unusual. I mean, the average person is not going to have the dimmest idea of even what they're talking about. The second type of organization would be a general revolutionary organization that could be of various kinds of things. You know, it might be, it might have a lot of people in it. It might be very specific to some country. It might be very specific to some project. You know, let's do this thing, this, you know, whatever it may be, this little coup or prank or, you know, publicity thing that's going to expose something, or it might have various things, but they're just saying that within that group, you generally don't want to have big differences, because those differences are going to translate into hierarchies. Now, we will get to later, and I agree, we haven't even been talking about this, but when we talk about May 68 and the stuff that we'll talk about later on.
Can I just say one
Sure.
thing, Ken? I don't understand. You say big differences in the understanding will lead to hierarchies. Well, isn't that kind of hierarchical? So what are all the dumb people that don't understand every little bit supposed to be like not in the group because they're too dumb? I don't get it.
It depends. Dumb people are not supposed to be in the SI because they have a very specific thing that requires intelligence.
Yeah, but dumb people are in the world.
That's right.
I
That's
mean,
right. That's right. But
Or we can kick out the smart people. We could do that.
this is just talking, you know, like when something like May 68 happens, which we'll be looking at 2 weeks from now, there suddenly the conditions have changed. And it doesn't really matter if somebody's even illiterate or something, you know, or doesn't have any political or historical knowledge or whatever. Some of those people may be some of the best people, you know, that come up with some new idea, maybe because their minds aren't so full of academic stuff. But that's in that different situation where you can say, let's take this building over. And you're talking to 500 people, say, or something. It becomes a possibility, and you don't need to poll all the people and say who has an IQ of X or something. It's irrelevant. You know, basically, the people who do it, they just do it. And it's a simple thing. You break down the door, you know, whatever you do to accomplish that thing. But if you're in a limited situation, which is what we call normal reality, we can't do that. I mean, I'm not going to talk to you like, say, Judy, let's go take over the city hall. You and I, and actually, I wouldn't even say it 200 people because it still would be unrealistic. So that would be stupid. And or hypothetically, I'm just as an aside, if we were going to do it, I would want to choose the people who knew how to break locks or something, not just somebody who was enthused about it. You know, but that's kind of a silly aside. But in the next 2 meetings, we'll be talking about situations where I think this becomes clearer. You know, like in quote normal situations, you aren't aiming, or at least the SI was not aiming to accumulate a lot of people. On the contrary, you know, that was the last thing they wanted, was 100 people saying, tell us what to do. So they wanted a few people who were pretty autonomous and, you know, could original, creative, who could come together fruitfully to maybe debate writing an article or disrupting something in a certain way or something like that. So in that way, they didn't want, you know, they want to keep it a minimum of inequality there. So it has nothing to do with looking down at other people. In fact, on the contrary, they tended to look down on academics much more than on the average person, for example. But it's just that's what he's talking about here. I'm sorry, it is complicated here, but I think in the next two meetings, we will, you may get a little bit better idea about what's going on when it comes down to, lots of people in the streets. Ed Stress.
Yeah, hi. It gets complicated. It does. I mean, in a way, it would be sort of like we're the intelligentsia and you guys are not in my class. So it sort of posits what it's working against. But in another way, if you look at it as like a working group, like I think of intellectuals as a working group, is like who knows how to make soup? We're going to make soup.
That's it.
And who has the water? And,
Yeah,
and who's good with buckets?
That is exactly it, Ed. That's the point.
I do equations and it's just another slog. I feel really stupid because I can't figure out these equations, but they're hard. Whatever. It's just my job and that's it. So thanks. I mean, I don't know if that casts any light or makes more confusion.
Okay, I think let's move on to this last piece, which I think is going to generate even more discussion. And this is this piece, Two Local Wars. And the opening 2 or 3 pages is a fairly scathing critique of, quote, the left, which I think is actually fairly understandable. I mean, they're pointing out the that kind of left is a sort of spectator left. It's like they're rooting for the Viet Cong because they're opposed to American imperialism. They're rooting for this because they're, and they, in most cases, they don't even know what they're rooting for. And if they do, they're not helping anything in any case. And so something like the Arab-Israel War comes along, and it's a lot more complicated than the Vietnam. The Vietnam War was pretty simple from most people's standpoint. And they conclude, to the extent that there is that we can say there's a solution, the solution is pretty simple. The United States needs to get the fuck out. That's all it is. And it's very simple. There's nothing complicated about it. As somebody said, oh, it's real complicated. Well, I don't think so. All you do is get a bunch of ships and have people move into the ships and then send the ships back to the United, and that will lead, as they said, regrettably, to the Stalinists, i.e. Viet Cong and Ho Chi Minh and so on, taking over. But there's no way you're going to get around that. So once that is the case, you can move on to figuring that out. But with the Arab-Israel War, they're saying it's not even that neat. So then they go through, like, there's a couple pages of Zionism, the background of the Israeli state, Zionism, and the kibbutzes and all these different things. And then they go into an even somewhat longer thing about the various Arab regimes, which are a total farce mess. They're mostly military dictatorships and, then, so they end up with this paragraph. Unlike the American war, the Palestinian question has no immediately evident solution. No short-term solution is feasible. The Arab regimes can only crumble under the weight of their contradictions, and Israel will be more and more the prisoner of its colonial logic. The future Arab revolutionary forces that will arise from the ruins of the June 1967 defeat must know that they have nothing in common with any existing Arab regime and nothing to respect among the powers that dominate the present world. They will find their model in themselves and in the repressed experiences of revolutionary history. Only an Arab revolutionary movement that is resolutely internationalist and anti-state can dissolve the state of Israel while gaining the support of that state's exploited masses. And only through the same process will it be able to dissolve all the existing Arab states and create Arab unity through the power of the councils. This may remind you of that paragraph we had in the address to revolutionaries of Algeria a couple meetings ago, which I'll quote. They were in that thing when they got to the Middle East, they said the Arab regime, movements have accomplished some things, but they've got Islam in their way. They need to give freedom to the Kurds, and it must stop swallowing the Palestinian pretext that justifies the dominant policy in the Arab states, a policy that insists on the destruction of Israel and thereby perpetuates itself, since this destruction is impossible. The repressive forces of the state of Israel can be undermined only by a model of a revolutionary society realized by the Arabs. Just as the success of a model of a revolutionary society somewhere in the world would mark the end of the largely sham confrontation between the East and the West, it would also mean the end of the Arab-Israel confrontation, which is a miniature reproduction of it. So I'm going to throw things open to questions, comments. And I might add, before we get into on the Vietnam problem, which normally we would maybe have an interesting discussion about that, but the Palestine thing definitely supersedes it these days. But on the history of Vietnam, there is this superb book, and it's so superb that I helped translate it and edit it. It's by a friend of mine, a late friend of mine, Ngo Van, who died I met him in Paris, and he died at the age of 92, back in, I think, 2002 or 3, something like that. And this is his autobiography. And it's a really gem of a book. And I put it all on my website, which I will send you the link to. But I encourage you to get the book because it's got dozens of great pictures, of all these things going on. This is the story of Vietnam, mostly pre-World War II, like when various forces are fighting the French, Stalinists, Trotskyists, anarchists, Buddhists, and so on. And the net result is at a certain point, the Stalinists, which was the Ho Chi Minh people, take over, mostly in the aftermath of World War II. And once they take over, they simply murder all the opponents. And so most of this guy's friends were just killed, just bam. He escaped to France and became a factory worker in France, and he was president in May 68 and so on. And so anyway, it's a fantastic book. Anyway, I imagine most of you will want to talk about the Palestine issue, so feel free. Judy, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I thought this was very interesting, this article, and also really prescient. I didn't really agree so much with when he talked about Zionism, which I think is a really kind of misunderstood term now. And anyway, but that aside, that paragraph where he says about Palestine, it has lived by delirious bluff, for it was only able to survive by constantly raising the specter of Israel, being utterly incapable of effecting any radical solution whatsoever to the innumerable domestic problems. The Palestinian problem remains the key to Arab power struggles. It is everyone's central reference point, and all conflicts hinge on it. It is the basic of the objective solidarity of all the Arab regimes. You know, I think that's really true, and I think that's really, you know, and I think Israel's really been demonized for years and partly blamed for all the problems in the Arab world. Lack of any kind of leadership, the corruption, and blah, blah, blah. It's all because of Israel. And I mean, and it's sort of like in Egypt, with the Arab Spring, you know, when they had the Arab Spring, that was all really great. But all I thought of was, well, they got to get the money back or nothing's going to come of this, you know? There's got to be a change in the money. And the same with in the Arab world, they blame everything on Israel. And instead of looking to their own, you know, lack of leadership and the horrible despots they have, you know, leading them, the lack of human rights and all that. And I'm just wondering, you know, and that's been going on for quite a while. And now I think whether you can achieve any kind of resolution is even worse because, you know, within the past, 60 years, you've had the growth of these fundamentalist Islamic groups, we call them terrorists, and they, you can't really deal with them in ordinary political terms, regardless of whether that's, problematic anyway, blah, 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 regular politics. But how do you deal with a group like Hamas or Hezbollah or the Taliban? How do you deal with people whose, thinking is so far away from what even us poor, messed up capitalists?
Israel propped up Hamas for years. That was their preferred opponent.
Well, I think
there
Hamas
were all sorts of other Palestinian things, and sometimes people create the opponent that they would rather be there, and that's what
I understand that that's the case.
Bruce?
Yes, it was my recollection is that it was definitely the case that Israel propped up Hamas back in the late 1980s. And the reason they did it was to create a big split within the Palestinian movement and undermine the PLO. And in relative terms, the more unfortunate consequence was that the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which was the only secular body within the Palestinian movement, that effectively got sidelined.
Yeah.
Whatever else you want to think of the Popular Front of Liberation for the Liberation of Palestine, at least there was a secular movement and it wasn't theocratic.
Yeah.
Yeah, they chose their enemy well.
Sid? Unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. I think Judy raises this really fascinating point. When Judy, when you say, how do you deal with something like, the Israelis being demonized, or how do you deal with a group like Hamas or Hezbollah, et cetera? One of the things about this article, to me, it was like a lightning rod. It was like flash, bang, because like lately, particularly, it seems like people are talking about, oh, it's one side or the other. It's like these guys are right or those guys are right. And you have, Israel and Hamas, and it's like they're perfect enemies. But the thing that I got from this article, for me, was that in a way it's all false. It's all like it's pseudo it's a conflict between two groups who want to be the head bureaucrats. You know, the Hamas doesn't, you know, I don't have any illusion that Hamas really cares about the Palestinian people, or is kind of like the SI and wants to dissolve itself when the Palestinians, you know, are free or are free of Israeli oppression. And nor do Israelis really care about, you know, it's almost like they need each other, right? They're similar enemies. And it gets to me, it was like, oh, this whole thing is, in a way, it's kind of like this very typical distraction. It's like this fight between this group and that group, and it fails to look at, you know, what they say about the only solution. You know how the whole thing with Israel and Palestine, which is very close to my heart. I mean, it was something that happened to me back when I was, you know, I was raised in a Jewish tradition, and I grew up in a college situation where, you know, there was a big thing back in '69 with Israel, and I mean, they were fighting back then. And it was like, wait a minute, you know, and I would find myself like arguing in favor of Palestinians, and I basically gave up religion at that point because it seemed like it just seemed like an organization dedicated to hatred and exclusion and a lack of but anyway, back to what Judy was saying, I was thinking that this article for me points out that there is no solution to the Arab-Israeli question. You know, all this talk about two states and all this other crap, to me, is like a bunch of bullshit, because they've been talking about that forever, and nobody really cares about it or wants it, or can even has the possibility of realizing it. Right now, they're talking about what happens after the Israelis are done, you know, bombing Gaza to dust, and who's going to control all that dust, right? And it's like just trying to set up a new power on top of them. But basically, it sounds like what the Situationists were saying is the only real solution is a revolutionary solution. It's a solution like a distinct and apart from an organization like Hamas or the Israeli government or anything like that. The only possible solution is for the people in that area to like become clear about what's happening, and to provide some sort of an example. I mean, you know, one would have thought that the kibbutzim was an example at some point, but I don't really think so. I mean, I don't really know that much about what the kibbutzim were. I mean, it would seem like some sort of experiment in communism, but like most religions, it kind of got mutilated is not the word, but you know, it got
Perverted.
yeah. But I think the main point, I mean, the thing that, and it's just barely coming into my consciousness right now from this article, and it's like not super clear, but it's almost like there is no solution of this back and forth business, just like there's no solution between the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, it's just like there's just no real solution. It's just some sort of, you know, one can call names and do all this other stuff, but you know, and sometimes we demonize Israel and sometimes we demonize Hamas and the Palestinians, but it's kind of like, no, it's really, that's not it. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, that's basically it.
Bruce? You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
I think to understand the kibbutzes, you have to go back in Jewish history to the Polish Bund, which was the socialist movement within the European among the European Jews. And I think that there was a link between this once powerful movement within the Jewish Jews that was socialist and the kibbutz experiments.
And what did you call that?
The Jewish Bund, Bund.
Indeed.
Look it up. You do a Google of Polish Jewish Bund, you'll see what I'm talking about. It was particularly big in places like Poland.
Mm-hmm.
Ed? Ed Stress?
Mike, you came in about the same time I did. You want to go first, or I don't care.
Go ahead, Ed. Well, he'll be
All right.
next.
Oh, me?
No, well,
No,
I
go ahead, Ed.
Go ahead, Ed.
I'm going. I'm just. I mean, it's kind of a big subject. Yeah, just like taking a breath. God, we're privileged to live in these times, to be challenged by them so much. I mean, it'd be nice to think about the cow and the 40 acres or something. I mean, I've always thought, like, ever since I was a kid, like, okay, well, this is what I would do with this part of the world. This is what I'd do with this part of the world, But in the Middle East, I said, nah, never mind. These two people, they're both going to be, it's going to be hard. I don't know. I mean, just looking at it through compassion, I just want to cry, but looking at it through religion, it's kind of a nightmare.
As was brought up a few meetings ago, when that idea of an Arab Revolutionary Society or something, and somebody mentioned Rojava, and we talked about that briefly, and I sent a bunch of links about that. I mean, I still think, although Rojava, of course, is mostly Kurdish, but same idea, that there is something going on there. I don't want to get into too much detail, but
Rojava?
Rojava, that movement in northern Syria, where I said a bunch of about that, and there's probably debates on how cool this is or not, or whatever. But it does seem to me to be somewhat of a breath of fresh air compared with what we've usually had in the region. It's kind of astonishing that it managed to crop up there. Mike, do you have?
Could I say a little bit?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've heard some programs and I've thought about it through game theory, and it seems like these two people are going to have to live there. And how are they going to get along after they've been so much blood on both sides? It's really, I mean, like the destination, even imagining a destination, how we're going to get there. And if Israel completely colonizes them and dumps them into the neighboring Egypt, then they're still going to be there. They're not going to just evaporate.
Yeah.
So it's going to go on.
There will be thousands of people with a huge grudge.
And half of the buildings have been torn down.
Yeah.
And it's the size and density of New York City.
Yeah.
And it's about the same, 2 million people. I mean, like whether they have it in mind, the Zionists in their perspective now are doing, I mean, many people on NPR even have talked about the word genocide. but I don't think it's genocide. I think it's, we're coming to visit you in Berkeley and we want your house and you're going to share it with us. And after 30 days, you're going to get kicked out of your house in Berkeley.
Yeah.
And that's happening with the real estate industry. They charge tremendous amounts of money for everybody's house, so their kids want to sell out and move out of Berkeley and destroy Berkeley. There you go.
Okay, let's move on to these other
Thank
folks.
you. I really think there's a parallel, although the slightness of the parallel in Berkeley. But defenestration, I think, is the problem. Go. I yield to you, Ken.
Mike?
Since the conflict began, I started to look into the history of the whole thing, and I looked into the history of the Zionist movement, and there was a faction fight between the revisionists and the other Zionists, and the revisionists were led by this guy Jabotinsky, and he wanted to set up a Jewish state in Palestine, whereas the other ones didn't, and so they had a faction fight. You know, idealists do that. So the second point I wanted to make is the question of the class, a class analysis of Gaza and Israel might start with figuring out who actually owns the economy, and like 60, the upper 10% in Gaza own 66% of the wealth, and the upper 10% in Israel own 67% of the wealth. Those are the people who are in the ruling classes, right? If you want to set up a classless society, you have to start talking about a class analysis. Yeah. Okay, and the third thing was that the question of colonization. Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire until the end of World War I. It had been since 1453, when they kicked the Christians out, and that was the end of the Eastern Roman Empire. But the thing of it is that this sort of thing was welcomed by the British and the French, who took over that area called the Levant and all that when in the aftermath. And the guy, and you know, it was the Sykes-Picot Agreement. You can look that up if you want to. It's in the movie Lawrence of Arabia. It's one of the great scenes in the movie. But anyway, the question is, why is it that the British government under Lord Balfour wanted to support the creation of a Jewish state in that area? Well, apparently, Lord Balfour was a fundamentalist Christian, and a lot of fundamentalist Christians in Europe wanted to get rid of the Jews, and they thought that the best way to get them out of Europe was to drain them into Palestine. And so there was a big movement to support by Christians to support the Zionist movement of Jewish people into Palestine. And just one little sidelight, and that is that I discovered that the Polish government in the late 1930s, 1936 on, they were an anti-Semitic government, but they actively trained people from the Irgun, who were the revisionist Zionists, in military warfare in the Tatra Mountains, and then sent them off to Palestine to complete the project. So all of this has to be taken into consideration, and the Situationists were spot on. The only way you're going to create peace in that area of the world is a no-state solution, not a two-state solution. You have to actually abolish the state, and you have to get the workers to become class conscious to do that. And they ain't going to be class conscious if they're thinking about religion all the time or some other thing. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. Alex, we haven't heard from you. Unmute yourself.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks so much. Appreciating the conversation. I had kind of a general question about the Situationists' intel that they get about various international conflicts. Where would they have been learning about the what would have been their sources for, intrigue in the higher echelons of any kind of party politics, say in China or Soviet Union or Cuba or wherever else, Vietnam? Would they have, for instance, been taking for granted whatever would have been being reported in Le Monde or the main rags? For instance, all of us, as the conflict in Palestine is happening right now, we're seeing so transparently how a lot of these major outlets will baldly lie and hold the line on the lie for a long time, right? So I just kind of wonder, as a epistemological, methodological, historiographical question, when the Situationists are trying to size up the terrain of struggle, and they're using the examples of, the communists and national liberation struggles of the 20th century to try to figure out, what do we do? What's the best way to do it? How do we go wrong? Yeah, how suspicious are they of the intel from the main outlets, and then what would they trust? What would be their standard to be able to see through the spectacle?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you some examples here. Rene Vianney was a sinologue, or still is, actually. He's still alive. And he actually went to China as a young man, as a student. And he knows Chinese thoroughly and so on. And when he was over there in the mid 60s, and then a little later, I think in 1969 or 70, he went to China, to Hong Kong and Japan also. So he lived in China, either in Beijing or Shanghai, I forget which, for maybe half a year or something like that. And he could read all the party things that you and I would never know. They're not the things that get translated for foreign consumption. And so in some cases, he would mail Debord, here's some examples of something that this hints that there's some problem over in this city here, because look at what they're denouncing. There is a way, like, if with reasonable intelligence, there have been people, and it's not all that bizarre, who can read the media and more or less see through the, as Rexroth put it, read through the lies. You can see that this person claims such and such, and if you know who that person is, you can see, why would he be mentioning this topic over here? Well, it's because blah blah blah. You can go too far in that and become a vast conspiracy thing. But do you know who I.F. Stone is?
I don't.
Okay, I.F. Stone was a very famous journalist in the U.S. from the late 40s for the next 3 or 4 decades. And he had a little newsletter that came out once a week. It was called I.F. Stone's Weekly. And he was based in Washington, D.C. And he was just him. He didn't have a battery of researchers and reporters, all that. But just by reading the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Congressional Record and, a few things like that, he was able to say, there's plenty of material there. All you've got to do is have enough sense to say, well, this part over here is just fluff for the peanut gallery there. And this is part where they're actually passing a law and they've inserted something that will give a tax break to somebody or something like that. It's on record, but you have to know the terrain. You have to know how it works. So I'm just saying there are people that we're not completely a victim, and we don't even have to totally depend on people like I.F. Stone, because some of this stuff is just sort of common sense. That you wouldn't trust blah, blah, blah. But some of it, you do depend on I.F. Stone or on somebody, there are people like that are familiar with this. Well, Mustafa Kayati is a Tunisian. and back then, when they were writing that stuff about Algeria and so on, I think Debord, my impression is that Debord ended up sort of doing the final version, but he would have discussed with Kayati, okay, what's going on here in Algeria? And I mean, Debord didn't read Arabic. So Kayati rose up, he's in the country next. Kayati would be able to say, oh, so I'm in Algiers now. I'm reading the papers every day. I'm reading the posters on the wall. I'm doing this, I've consulted with this. I know that such and such a journal is pretty reliable. I know that these things over here are just tools of the Stalinists or something. Yeah, whatever it may be. And so you can come out with things. You'll notice in some of these articles, they'll be quoting papers, but they're not doing it naively. Usually they quote papers that you could trust them because they're saying stuff that expose themselves. Like in other words, if Boumediene, the coup leader, says something, what motives he would have. And so if his official thing says something, you're going to say, oh, this implies that they're worried about such and such. That's all you need to do. You'll notice that in the thing about China, in this article, they will say that this huge amount of China is not in control of Beijing. You have these warlords who have this thing that's bigger than France or something just under their control. And they're so powerful there that the Beijing doesn't dare, they have to negotiate with them. And so, but how do they know that? It's because they're reading in the party things. They're saying in this province, Chairman so-and-so is blah, blah, blah. And that person was denounced as a warlord traitor. And then the SI is saying, ironically, apparently this campaign against General so-and-so had limited success because 3 months later, they're still negotiating with the guy. They didn't just go in and arrest him or something. So you can find out how things are going like that. And, Marx did the same thing back in his day. In fact, Marx himself was a journalist. Like part of what he made his money on, in the early 50s and stuff like that, was writing for the New York Herald or something like that, about European events. And some of the Engels did the same stuff. So to do that, they knew how to research it. They knew which things to distrust. And, so there are ways to do it. It's just that you can't just plop in to a thing and saying, what's going on in the Middle East? Where's the thing to find? Because there are thousands of different sources. And I mean, I myself, it's not an area that I've bothered with. Like, there have been times when I researched Iran during the 1978-79 thing, because I was writing an article about it. And so I did do that. And if you do that, you can find little things. Like I ended up writing a thing and I could quote something out of the New York Times that was perfect. Do you want, let me give you an example of that. Okay. Here, so I'm just this guy in Berkeley writing about Iran. I don't know Farsi. I mean, I've met maybe a few radical students that were in Berkeley at the time, but they're kind of unreliable too, and who knows where they're at. But I ended up writing what I think is a pretty good piece there. And I start out like in the first paragraph, I can say, this uprising has shaken all the ruling powers of the world and exposed their collusion. The Arab regimes are as alarmed as Israel. The Chinese bureaucracy was caught with its pants down. It supported the Shah and denounced his opposition, thus continuing the policy of Mao and Zhou Enlai, who praised him for his anti-imperialism. These were things, I could just read these in the paper. As for the Russian bureaucracy, far from, quote, stirring up trouble in Iran, it has always aimed at maintaining a stable, highly policed regime there, as elsewhere on its borders, so as to prevent any contagion of rebellion from spreading to its own people. It has sold arms to the Shah. I mean, imagine, you know, here the Shah is suddenly the bad guy, and Russia has been selling him arms for decades, you know, and turned fugitive Iranian radicals over to the Shah's secret police. I mean, it's even worse. You know, like some guy escapes over the border who's against the Shah, and you deliver him back to the Shah's torturers. And that guy is a so-called communist who supposedly is your party. This is what Russia did. And I knew that this was absolutely, you know, there. All I had to do is read, and I know that this happens, and nothing secret about it. Only when the Shah's downfall seemed likely did it cautiously begin hedging its bets. And again, I'm just looking at what they say, and you can see, oh, they're starting to hedge their bets there and saying, well, the Shah isn't perfect, or you know, whatever. The saber rattling between Russia and the U.S. was strictly for the benefit of the spectators, you know, where each of them is accusing the other of stirring things up. So get this, here's something I got out of New York Times. American Ambassador William Sullivan admitted, quote, "We ran Laos, you know, during the Vietnam War, but in Iran, which is tremendously important to us, there's not much we or anyone else can do." Here's this ambassador talking about it. Ironically, he's still quoting, all the major powers, the US, Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union, are alarmed by what is going on in Iran. New York Times, 13 November 1978. You know, so I could pick out something like that, and, you know, this is not put on. I mean, they don't like to admit stuff like that. And he is either naively or stupidly or cluelessly saying, ironically, all of these powers are against this. Well, duh. You know, there's reasons for that, you know, and that's one sign that there was something radical going on there. It didn't mean it was going to end up well, you know, but I'm just saying, you know, this is an uprising, you know, of millions of people. And I was able to confidently make statements like that just on the basis of reading. My main source for that was the Christian Science Monitor and the New York Times. I read a bunch of radical pamphlets and stuff, but that was mostly irrelevant. You know, it was sufficient to read that stuff, you know, for me to say, hey, there's a strike going on here that most people aren't talking about, but the Monitor does mention it. And the strike is against Khomeini's orders, you know, by the oil workers, you know, things like that. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling off here, but I mean, that's how I did it. And I'm just this guy I didn't study, you know, these things in school or anything. I just read a couple papers, and, you know, I got a couple books about Iran just to get the background, you know, where does the Shah come from, or who's Khomeini, or something like that. Just like I read about Saddam when we were having the Gulf War thing, you know, some years later. But mostly, you know, if you just sort of know how to have a little bit of healthy skepticism, you can figure out that stuff. Bruce.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I really agree with you about I.F. Stone. He was a remarkable force in the United States back in the 50s and 60s. But the one point I wanted to get to was about Israel and Palestine. And there's a lot of bleakness in the discussion about what's going on there, and I understand that. But there is one very positive thing that's been happening in recent years inside of Israel. And that is that there's a significant movement of young people in Israel who've been refusing military service and doing so consciously because they don't want to participate in the occupation and persecution of the Palestinians. And I see those people as the potential embryo of a more positive, much more positive movement, which could, if particularly if workers linked up to it, could really turn into something promising.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And that's been
The
going on.
Refuser Solidarity Network based in New York City that actually mobilizes support for these military resistors inside of Israel.
Yeah, and that has been going on for a long time, and I think it's been increasing over the years. But there have always been a certain number of people that said, I'm not doing it. And they get a really hard time in Israel, as I understand it, but they've still been doing it. So, well, we're getting to about end time here. I think, Sid, we'll give you the last question or comment and then close it up here.
Relating to what Bruce said, which was appreciated, one would also notice the perhaps not revolutionary, but there was a massive protests against Netanyahu going on right before, that super amount of pressure, and a lot of it sounded like there was a lot of the Israeli population were conscious about him and his, let's mildly call it deficits, and problems with him and his policies and his behaviors. And interestingly enough, it seemed like very similar in my mind to what happened in this country when right before 9/11, is that there was this thing, something happened to make it so that the country mobilizes. It seems like that, mobilizes and makes it impossible or much more difficult to be critical of the administration.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of like, to me, that's a way that capital power has of maintaining itself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a distraction. And it almost makes me think, and I suppose this is my little conspiracy theory, but it almost makes me think, how all these questions arose about how could the Israeli intelligence organization fail to see what was coming from Hamas, right? To me, it sort of reminds me of this was something, again, a reminder or a parallel that in World War II, how after, junior high school and high school history, and then one learned that Roosevelt was aware that Japan was going to drop a bomb on Pearl Harbor. It was like something that, like, we need the war in order to create enough distraction to prevent this protest.
Yeah. So as the Situationists say, as always, war, when not civil, can only, it accomplishes all that stuff. It reinforces
exactly.
each side clings more vehemently to its own thing. Whereas a week earlier, they might have been very pissed off and skeptical about their leaders or something. But once you get a war going, it's very hard not to rally to that. And the
Mhm.
people who don't buy it, you know, are usually pretty cautious, like, I better I better wave my flag too, or people are gonna lynch me or something,
Right, right.
because I'm not for the country.
Yeah,
So I think we better wind it up there. Thanks for being with us here, and I think everything considered, we had a very, really decent discussion on these contentious matters. So we'll have one more meeting 2 weeks from now about May 68, and I'll be sending you the thing for that. And then we'll skip for about 4 weeks into mid-January for our follow-up. So I'll be, at this point, I'm going to turn off the recording.